from around the home. From Around the Home by Peter McArthur. We are all weary travelers upon life's dusty race. If any man can play the pipes, in God's name, let him play. Thank you.
Great poem, Costa. Thank you. At this, I don't need that on for this. At this time, I would like to present Harold Carruthers to come up and say a few words. This is Harold's personal collection in here to do with Peter McArthur. He graciously brought it in for everybody to see at this time. We also have another display over there, but this is Harold's personal collection. Harold Carruthers, please.
His glasses on straight. Anyway, I want to welcome everyone to our Peter McArthur Day here presentation. Anyway, for those that don't know me, my name is Harold Carruthers, a local historian. Anyway, the very first time I heard of Peter McArthur was about 70 years ago. I used to spend a lot of time at my grandmother Carruthers on the farm. And one evening I stayed over and my grandmother had me come into the parlor. They used to have the parlors in the old homes. And it was there that she had all her family pictures and books. It was there that she had 3 special books. She had The Red Cow and Her Friends. She had The Green Pasture, or Pastures Green, and she had Sinking of the Titanic. She read to me several pages from the Peter McArthur books. They had belonged to my grandfather, William Carruthers, and he was approximately the same age as Peter McArthur. Now, many years later, or went by, and I married my wife, Linda Lee Carruthers, or Pole. And their farm was next door to Peter McArthur's farm. I had the 2 books from my grandmother through conversations with Leonard, which was Linda Lee's father. I started picking up quite an interest in Peter. And from that point on, I purchased books from Grover Antiques, which used to be in town here, and the Attic Bookstore in London. And I bought a few at auctions and more. I picked them up as much as I could all over the place. Then in 1987, the Historical Society had a guest speaker here, and he's sitting right in front of me. Donnie Sinclair as a guest speaker, speaking about Peter McArthur. I have been collecting books and material about over 50 years now, and I have gathered up most of his books as well as many others which he inserted writings in, which are the ones mainly in the bottom section here. Now, at this point, I would like to say if there's anyone online right now or present that is connected to Peter McArthur, I would like to actually hear from him, if possible, with contact information, because we do plan on having further things throughout the year to do with Peter. So I guess that's all I got to say for myself. So now I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker for the afternoon. Stephanie McDonald grew up on a farm in Ackford Township and attended Trent University and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She has diverse experience working on climate change, food security, and public health policy in the nonprofit section in Canada, Tanzania, and Ireland. I said that wrong. She moved to Dublin in 2019 and works as the coordinator of the Dublin City University Center for Climate and Society. Anyway, I would like you to present Stephanie McDonald with her presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Good afternoon and a very good evening from Dublin. Thank you to the Glencoe Historical Society for the invitation to speak today. Before I begin, I hope you'll allow me to say a few words of thanks. I'd like to thank both Mary Simpson and Harold Carruthers for the discussions we've had about Peter McArthur over the last few months and their enthusiasm about celebrating Peter McArthur in the centenary year of his death. Harold has been a great source of information about McArthur and has been generous in sharing his own McArthur collection with me. I'd also like to thank Donnie Sinclair. Many of you will know that Donnie purchased Peter McArthur's farm from his son, and over the past decades has done so much to keep McArthur's memory alive. Last summer, I spent an afternoon with Donnie where he shared stories about McArthur, as well as photos and articles he'd collected over the years. You can see Donnie here in 2011 giving a presentation to the Glencoe Historical Society and a photo of him from last summer. I'd like to acknowledge Peter McArthur's relatives who are on the call, including some of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I've had the great pleasure of connecting with some of them, and I do hope you'll correct anything I've gotten wrong. And finally, thanks to all who have joined. I give you the caveat that I'm not a historian, nor am I a McArthur expert. Even though I grew up in Glencoe and my great-grandparents is less than a mile. Even though I grew up in Glencoe and my great-grandparents' farm is less than a mile as the crow flies from the old McArthur farm, I would have been hard-pressed to tell you anything about Peter McArthur until a couple of years ago. I was finally inspired to pick up a Peter McArthur book by my brother Jamie, who I could hear laughing out loud as he read a McArthur book. I then found myself doing the same, laughing out loud as I read his stories. Ever since reading that first book, I've been fascinated by Peter McArthur as a person and writer. So it's really a pleasure for me to share stories about him with you that I've enjoyed discovering, and I hope it might inspire some of you to pick up a McArthur book for the first time, or if you've read him in the past, to read it again and share it with others. For 16 years, between 1909 and 1924, Peter McArthur wrote columns in the Globe newspaper, mostly about the daily happenings on his farm in Ackford Township. What was to become his last article was written while he was recovering from surgery in London's Victoria Hospital. It's actually more accurate to say that he dictated the article to his wife, Mabel, who then sent it off to the paper in Toronto. McArthur had come through the initial surgery all right, but within the space of a week, he had required a second surgery and died of heart failure. His final article, simply titled Water, has all the characteristics of a typical Peter McArthur article that he became famous for. With his trademark humor, McArthur starts his article by saying, "Yes, I've had an operation. That's that." Most writing people, when they have an operation nowadays, turn it into copy. I am not wishing to be thought eccentric, so I shall do the same. He then demonstrates his brilliant memory, wide-ranging interests, and his knowledge of the world, past and present. He mentions an article from a New York newspaper from many years previous, discusses prohibition, and references ancient Egypt and astrology, before looping back, as he always did, to his farm in Eckford. He tells his readers that when someone in the hospital asked him what he would like to drink, he requests a John Collins, a cocktail of gin, lemon juice, sugar, and carbonated water. That didn't sit well, though, and it's then he has the revelation that what he is really craving is water, but not just any water. While he praises the City of London water he was given, it couldn't beat the water found on his farm. This is another theme McArthur seemed to take delight in. The farm was always better than the city. He writes that the finest drink of water he ever enjoyed was on the line fence of his woodlot. He says, "I was stretched out at full length on a snowbank, drinking from the pure ice water that gurgled up through the snow before me." This got him thinking about how each spring on the farm, they had running water that was going to waste. He said that if he got out of the hospital, he would buy a bottling machine and bottle the water that could be used through the summer for table use. He also proposed an ice plant that would allow him to cool the water to just the right temperature to offer friends and visitors. This was another recurring theme in McArthur's writing. He was constantly coming up with new business ideas and schemes for farm improvements. A water bottling machine was one of his less offbeat ideas. In conclusion, he says that if everyone were taught how delicious pure water is and avoided substitutes, they will not only help to bring about a water drinking world, but they will spread health and open the doors to better living. I'm convinced that McArthur could spin an interesting tale out of any situation he found himself in, including a yearning for Eckford Township water while sick in the hospital. McArthur was just 58 years old when he died on October 28, 1924. Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King sent a condolence telegraph to his family, and obituaries ran in newspapers across the province of Ontario and from coast to coast. He was remembered as the Sage of Eckford, a great Canadian writer, and a friend of farmers. I think it's this last description that he would have been most proud of. Journalists reported that hundreds of neighbors, friends, and colleagues attended McArthur's funeral on his family farm on what is now fittingly called McArthur Drive. Some had traveled great distances to be there. After a brief service, a procession that was said to stretch for nearly 2 miles made its way from the farm to Edie Cemetery. McArthur was buried beside his parents in the southwest corner of the cemetery, close to the road leading to Glencoe. His gravestone hints at the fact that he was a different sort of person in comparison to his ancestors and peers. While most of the gravestones in Edie Cemetery have Bible verses or religious references on them, McArthur's epitaph says, "The living do but what the dead inspire." It's the last line of a poem he had written for a friend. At the time of his death, Peter McArthur was a household name across Canada, counted the late former Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier among his friends, was regularly called upon for advice from politicians, financiers, and others in high places, and had been courted to lead a political party. It can be easy to forget that McArthur really only came into his own in his 40s when he returned to his farm. Up to then, he'd had only sporadic success, constant financial worries, and bad luck seemed to follow him around. I've told you about the final days of McArthur's life, so let me take you back to the beginning. Peter was born on March 10th, 1866, to parents who had separately immigrated to Canada. He was the youngest of 7 children who grew up in a log house his father had built. Both Gaelic and English were spoken in the family's home. Interestingly, McArthur's parents initially restricted what he was allowed to read, worried that if he read books in English, he would forget his Gaelic. It was a minister that intervened and convinced them that it would be okay for McArthur to read English books. He read widely and remembered much of what he had read. As an adult, he could recite whole pages of text that he had read sometimes decades ago. McArthur attended Eckward No. 13 public school, excuse me, and high school in Wardsville and Strathroy. He obtained his teacher's certification and took a one-room school in Caradoc, but lasted only 6 months there. At the age of 22, he moved to Toronto and started an arts course at the University of Toronto. That too was short-lived, as he didn't have enough money to cover his living expenses. For the next nearly 2 decades, McArthur lived in Toronto, New York, Long Island, London, England, before almost doing a full circle back, first to New York, then for a short time in Niagara-on-the-Lake, where his wife was from. He married Mabel Haywood Waters, and they had 5 children: Daniel, McKellar, Elizabeth, James, and Ian. And you can see a photo of the 5 children when they were young, and then 4 of them when they're a bit older. These are photos that came from Peter McArthur's grandchildren. Throughout his time in America and England, he was writing for newspapers and magazines, sometimes doing freelance work, and twice as the editor of well-known magazines. You can see him at his desk in New York, where he was editor of the magazine Truth. He also worked in advertising, both for newspapers and at his own advertising company. Even when McArthur seemed to have life made with full-time positions that came with a steady income and prestige, he never stayed long. He seemed to be forever restless and too independent-minded to be working for others. Finally, at the age of 42, and after 18 years outside of Canada, McArthur returned to his family's farm in Eckward Township. While he would later frame it as a romantic return to the land, that was only partly true. In a letter to a friend, McArthur says, "I landed on the old farm, dead broke and all in." The return to his childhood home signaled a new chapter in McArthur's life, and was the thing that helped him find the success he had always been chasing. His life from that point is really split between 4 overlapping themes: as a farmer, writer, sage, and I would argue, a radical. The family farm that McArthur returned to was 75 acres. In addition to the log house, there were barns, a grain field and pasture, 2 orchards, and a woodlot. The family had cows, sheep, pigs, horses, chickens, ducks, turkeys, guinea fowl, dogs, and cats, all who became familiar by name to readers of McArthur's articles. McArthur never seemed to be comfortable calling himself a proper farmer. He is quoted as saying, "I write for a living and farm to amuse my neighbors." Several times in his writing, he refers to his neighbors as real farmers, implying that he's not. He once wrote that government scientists came out of their way to see me and gazed with awe at the neglected farm from which I had raised such a crop of newspaper articles. By shying away from the title of a real farmer, I think he was simply acknowledging that it wasn't his full-time occupation, like it was for his neighbors. He lived life as a farmer, but he didn't make his living from farming. McArthur writes so often of mishaps on the farm, including frequent successful escape attempts by his animals, that readers could be mistaken into thinking that he was only playing at farming, or at the very least wasn't very competent. But he wrote with a depth of knowledge that only the experience of farming day in and day out could give you, that I think we need to see him as a so-called real farmer. He wrote about the things that consume farmers, what the weather was like, how his crops were growing, and what his neighbors were doing. In particular, when he writes about working with animals, his observations are so astute that they could only have been written by someone farming on a daily basis. McArthur also had the traits of many farmers I know. It was said that when he came into town, he was restless and counted the hours until he could get away, and that city social gatherings of any size did not appeal to him. In one Globe article, he said, "After a visit of several days to several cities, it certainly does seem good to be home again." He was most happy on his farm and spent hours exploring it, observing his farm animals and taking note of the weather and changing seasons. Everything he did and saw on the farm became fodder for his newspaper articles. Now onto McArthur, the writer. Almost as soon as he returned to the farm, McArthur began to write regularly for the Globe newspaper, which later became the Globe and Mail. At first, his letters from the farm were published weekly, but were so popular they increased to twice a week. He also wrote for another newspaper called the Farmer's Advocate for 7 years, between 1910 and 1917. McArthur primarily wrote about what was happening on his farm, and often told stories of his animals. Red Cow, also known as Fence Viewer, featured regularly, as did Socrates the ram, Beatrice the sow, and Bildad the dog. Readers became so invested in his animals that they would send letters to McArthur asking for updates. In his articles, McArthur wrote about making maple syrup, the joy of asparagus season, what a lack of rain or too much rain was doing to his crops, a visit from a neighbor, his delight at discovering animal footprints in the snow, planting trees, and what he and his children observed while on walks through the woods. Pretty much anything and everything that happens on a farm made it into his articles. He also wouldn't shy away from talking about things that affected farmers, including politics, banking, the war, and other national and international events. He didn't have many kind words for business tycoons and corporations who took advantage of farmers, and his favorite villains were bankers. Regularly in his articles, McArthur would include a few lines of poetry, a quote from a play by Shakespeare, or reference a Greek classic. It's completely unexpected, for example, to come across a poem by the English poet Alfred Tennyson in the middle of an article about cattle, but this was McArthur's style. Whether intentional or not, by including poetry, literature, art, and philosophy into his writing, McArthur helped to change the image that others had of farmers, of being uneducated and inarticulate, and also showed his fellow farmers that these were things that were also for them to enjoy. What I like so much about McArthur's writing is that it is very conversational. It's not stuffy or flowery or preachy. He never took himself too seriously, and he was always the butt of the joke. Many of his obituaries mention that those who read his newspaper articles felt as if they knew him, and knowing him, liked him. Reading his books today, you wouldn't feel that they are 100 years old. There's been some critique that his writing was uneven, but I think the same could be said of any columnist who writes at least 2 articles a week. Not every article is going to be brilliant, and not all others were. As you read McArthur spin his tales, you can sometimes wonder if he took liberty with the truth, embellishing a situation to make it that bit more funny. But he puts paid to this idea in the introduction to one of his books, where he says, "At all times I told the truth, merely garnishing it with humor, poetry, and philosophy. Elsewhere, though, he wrote, "Facts are the bane of entertaining writing." Maybe the truth lies somewhere in the middle, though ultimately it doesn't matter. In addition to writing for newspapers, McArthur published a number of books of poetry and essays. I'll highlight just a few of them. He published his first book, a satire called "To be Taken with Salt," an essay on teaching one grandmother to suck eggs while in London, England. In an example of hard luck that seemed to find McArthur, both the book's publisher and printer went bankrupt, and the publisher's warehouse burnt down before the book was launched. It said that only 25 copies of the book that had been sent out for review survived. I know there are at least 2 copies in the Glencoe area and 2 at the University of Western Ontario, but it's difficult to know where the rest ended up. Fortunately, the book has been preserved and you can read it online. After a few years of writing articles for the Globe, McArthur decided he wanted to compile his best pieces into a book. In Pastures Green was published in 1915 and is presented as A Year on the Farm through the 4 seasons, though the articles were written over a number of years. His next book, The Red Cow and Her Friends, was published in 1919 and brings together some of his newspaper stories that featured his farm animals. In the book's preface, McArthur admits that he lost the file with the clippings he had been saving to put together the book. He wrote of his predicament in one of his newspaper articles, and as a result, he received clippings from all parts of Canada as well as neighboring states. He credits his readers who preserved his articles and sent them in as the real editors of the book. McArthur also wrote a biography of his friend and former Prime Minister, Sir Wilfrid Laurier. The publishers were in a hurry to release the biography soon after Laurier's death, and it said that McArthur completed it in just 2 weeks for them. A biography of the writer Stephen Leacock followed. Another notable book, The Affable Stranger, chronicled his travels through the US, examining the Canadian-American relationship. A further collection of his newspaper articles, called Around Home, was published on the first anniversary of McArthur's death. It was said he had been planning this volume before his death and had chosen the name of the collection. Familiar Fields was published in the same year and is a small collection of his stories intended for use in schools. Finally, in 1927, 3 years after McArthur's death, Friendly Acres was published. The stories in it were gathered and edited by his son, Daniel. This is my favorite book of McArthur's writing, with In Pastures Green a close second. 43 years after his death, The Best of Peter McArthur was published and brings together McArthur's farm articles as well as other more philosophical pieces. It was edited by Dr. Alec Lucas, a writer and academic who also wrote a biography of McArthur. One thing I do want to point out is that in his writing, McArthur curiously rarely wrote about women and almost never wrote about his wife, Mabel. When she does appear, it's only as a disembodied voice, calling him in to dinner. Mabel was successful in her own right, and we can assume, Mabel was successful in her own right, and we can assume that she played a large role on the farm, in addition to work in the home. Peter often traveled to her work and was consumed by writing while on the farm. I would have loved to have read more about her and her life in Eckford Township. I'm going to talk about Peter McArthur, the sage and radical together, as I think they overlap. So why sage? To begin with, McArthur was nicknamed the Sage of Eckford by his readers. His biographer thinks it was due to the impression he left on people, being warm-hearted and having both great knowledge and common sense. It was said he disliked this title as it made him seem old, but I think it's apt. McArthur was preoccupied with questions of work and leisure. He wanted everyone, and farmers in particular, to work less and engage more in leisure and enjoy the beauty that surrounded them. He tells a story of one spring working at planting trees and gardening with such grim determination, he didn't notice the entire progression from buds coming out on the trees to being in full leaf and the ground covered with wildflowers. He said, "During this strenuous period, I observed nothing, enjoyed nothing, thought nothing, read nothing. I reduced myself to a mere machine, capable of nothing but work and weariness." He went on to say that even though farmers lived more closely in touch with nature than anyone else, they probably enjoy her beauty less than anyone else. It was this tendency that he fought against. He encouraged farmers to pause and appreciate the nature they were so privileged to live in, even if it was just to stop work during the first few minutes after a summer shower, when everything in nature had been refreshed and the air was so pure. He would also nudge all of his readers to get outdoors. In one article, he says, "Why not stop right now and spend a few minutes in the open air with every sense alert to what is going on around you? I would if I could." In another, he says, "Get outdoors and waken up. There is health to be had for the taking, and enjoyment is free to all." McArthur often wrote about following his whimsies, which could include spending hours following his ducks around to see how they behaved. Or if he heard an unfamiliar bird sound, he would take a walk to investigate. He would sit in a south-facing chair and read his mail in the sun, and he liked to take naps in his trees. One of my favorite articles by him is called "How to Loaf." These tendencies go against our ideas of the farmer who was always at work, but I think there's sage lessons to be learned for all of us in his message, especially in our now faster-paced world. Turning to McArthur the radical, there are a few ways in which I see him as radical, both for his time and still today. The first is that he returned to the farm at a time when many from the countryside were leaving, drawn to a different life in cities as he had been as a young man. He was worried about this rural depopulation, and his writing can be seen as a way to coax people to stay on farms or return to them. McArthur always said he farmed for a living, not for a profit. He saw farming as a so-called homemaking industry, with money-making as a secondary consideration. He was most interested in the lifestyle a farm offered him and his family, and in this regard, he was successful. Today, I think most farmers would say that farming is very much a business enterprise where making money is essential. McArthur also had a great love of trees and planted thousands of them. He wondered that he should be so fond of trees, as he says that when he was a boy, trees were regarded almost as enemies. His elders had done the backbreaking work of clearing the land before they could put crops in, and that memory still lingered. When he returned to the farm and saw how much the forest around the farm had dwindled, he said that he was seized by a rage for planting. The government of the day had initiatives to encourage tree planting, but I suspect that it took a special sort of person to take up reforestation so soon after the land had been cleared, and McArthur did it with zeal. In an article, he says, "I know there are plenty of wise people who will say that I am foolish to be planting out trees in the garden land of Ontario, instead of clearing away those that remain. Still, there is a saving remnant of the people who believe that reforestation is a wise thing. I do not think I am making a mistake in casting my lot with them." In his writing, he talked often about the joy derived from trees, orchards, and woodlots, and in so doing, championed planting of trees. Beyond his own farm, he was worried about the destruction of forests across the country and the lack of attention to the issue. And one of the things I find most intriguing about McArthur is that he managed to do something that I think very few in Canada's history have done, and that's bridge the rural-urban divide. For 16 years, he wrote for a national mainstream newspaper, and his articles were anticipated and enjoyed by both readers in the countryside and the city, including those who knew almost nothing about farming. Writing after his death, a friend said that surely one who could do this must be regarded as having possessed something in the nature of genius. There's something to be said about people living in cities, hearing a firsthand account from a farmer of what a wet or dry summer means for the crops, what was being harvested that week, how a new government policy will affect the farming community, or just about the daily routine on a farm. Peter McArthur was the perfect person to do this. In a newspaper profile about McArthur, the author says, Peter is nothing if not cosmopolitan. He is as much at home discussing the clauses of the Bank Act before a parliamentary committee as he is talking crops with a neighbor while astride a rail fence on the back 50. I can't think of a farmer who is writing regularly in the national press today about the everyday happenings on their farm. Now in 2024, as we contend with issues of climate change, biodiversity loss, the paving over of productive farmland, and with an even smaller portion of the population farming, the tensions between rural and urban Canada seem to be running higher and misunderstandings becoming more entrenched. It feels like we need someone like McArthur, who had a talent for speaking to both the rural and urban populations, to step into the breach and explain one side to the other. So 100 years after his death, what can we say about Peter McArthur's legacy? Despite predictions he would be remembered for generations to come, McArthur has largely faded from memory. His family's log house has been preserved at Doon Heritage Village in Kitchener, which was a gift from Donnie Sinclair. Closer to home, the road that his farm was on is named after him, as is a park on Highway 2. His books are out of print, and while there is a great collection of them in the Glencoe Library and Historical Society, elsewhere they can be difficult to find. At the same time, we're fortunate that McArthur was such a prolific writer. He left us a record of farm life and activity in the early 20th century and documented what one of his biographers called the transition of Canadian society from the pioneer to the modern age. McArthur also left us reflections on farming, nature, family, rural life, and love of place that remain relevant today. He put Eckford Township on the map across the country, and for someone who grew up in Eckford, that means a lot. I'm biased, of course, but I think that Southwest Middlesex should be very proud to have been home to Peter McArthur and his life and work celebrated to a greater extent. Finally, to close, I wanted to share a passage from one of my favorite McArthur articles called Love of the Land. He wrote, "Something of this farm struck a tendril into my heart, which neither time nor distance could break. It is the only spot on earth that ever gave me the feeling of home. Even after being away for years, I have sat down in New York or London, England, and have been as homesick for this farm as a little boy who makes his first journey away from his mother's side. At any time, I could close my eyes and see the quiet fields, and I would wonder what crops they were sown to. At all times, it was my place of refuge. And when I finally returned to it, it was with a feeling that my wanderings had ended and that I could settle down and enjoy life where I belonged. Thank you."
At this time, if they want to speak, I would. Thank you. I'm told we have a Charlotte Waller, Catherine Burns, Diane Johnson, a Janet Sterling, and a Dan Burns. Dan Burns is Peter McArthur's great-grandson, and I'm told he wants to say a few words. maybe not.
It was more along the lines of someone asked me to say something. I think the person who should be asked to say something is Janet Sterling, if she's there somewhere, who's collected far more of the history than most of us did. Yeah, Stephanie asked about Mabel, and she does have her own interesting history. She was adopted into a family that a very early part of the Loyalist settlement of the Niagara Peninsula. And at least in my case, that's very important because that's how the name Daniel entered the family. And it's from that connection to the Loyalists of the Niagara frontier in the 1780s that led Peter McArthur and Mabel to name their eldest kid Daniel, which is a relatively unusual name among Highland Scots. And suddenly I'm looking at myself, nobody else. They're like an odd audience. Janet's probably got it. I'm not sure I can find mine anymore, but Stephanie, you might also want to look at least in the family, a famous letter that Peter wrote to Daniel when Dan McArthur joined the military in the First World War. Difficult personal and difficult family decision. I got a chance to read it at something that happened at Dune Pioneer Village a couple of years ago. Janet, you're there somewhere. So I can't quite tell what's going on with the audience. The only other thing that I think that's worth emphasizing, and that Stephanie just touched on briefly, is Peter McArthur's connection to politics. The effort to get him to consider running for the United Farmers, the campaign where he was Laurier's national campaign manager, a job which in those days was mostly to do with creating the communication materials, not the same kind of job that would have existed today. But both of those show how close he was to rural politics in Western Ontario, the home of the Clear Grits, early reformers, people who opposed the emergence of a Tory party, and before them, the Family Compact, people who are sympathetic to William Lyon Mackenzie. They all lie in the background of his world. And I think he stayed true to those propositions politically all through his life. And the manifestation of opposition to businesses that made farm life difficult is only part of that story. So Stephanie, if you keep going, I think there's much more to be had in understanding those dimensions of his character and his purpose and his view of life. And certainly from my partial perspective on inheritance, those values have cascaded down, certainly down our part of the family all the way for generations. Certainly my mother had it big time, and so I think did most of his kids. I'll stop. Must be other people who got something they'd like to add to all this. And I perhaps parenthetically say hello. I see my sister is somewhere on this call, although I can't see you. Can we go back to the gallery view?
Yeah. Any family members, you're welcome to speak, but there's others here in the program that have lined up and we can do Q&A. So carry on there, Norm.
Okay, no one else has anything to speak. We're gonna have if anybody has any questions now, we usually only have a 1 question and answer period, but today we're going to have 2. So if we don't get your question this time, we will get it the second go round. So any questions for anyone?
I have a question. How do we download these books and promote them so that the kids can read them? It's great to commemorate his life, but we need to read his stuff. And how do we go about doing that? Besides buying a book online. Stephanie?
Mary, there are a few of his books that are available online. It's the entire books. So I can share those links with you if you'd like. As I said, there is a great collection in Glencoe for those who are there. Yeah, but the best would be if folks want to see them online, there are some available. And just to say, yeah, that's right, from fadedpage.com. If you just type in Peter McArthur into the search engine there, they will come up and you can download them as PDFs. And I do just want to, I didn't mention in my talk, but I skipped over about 40 years of Peter McArthur's life. So there's lots more to be said about him and a lot more interesting stories.
More questions?
Any other questions? No questions. Okay, moving along. Now we're going to have Mr. Fred Sinclair come up and give a talk. He's been gathering stories and telling stories for a great number of years.
I think you mean Donnie Sinclair. You mean Fred or Donnie Sinclair? Fred.
Fred and Donnie. It says both of them on my sheet.
All right. Well, go ahead, Dad.
So I'm not sure.
Well, I was told today, you just want me to talk natural here to you people, eh? Okay. They told me just to do a little bit, not to be long-winded like Peter. So that's what I done. Some of you probably do that I'd done his whole life. And it's circulated around quite a bit of his hardships going to other parts of the world, trying to tell people how to run their country. Every time he came home, he was broke. And that's what I done. This is his whole life here of where he went and what he done. But what I done for today was very simple. I was asked about in the 1980s from 2 ladies on the main street in Glencoe if they didn't think that I should do a story on Peter McArthur. And I just kind of laughed at them. I do them both really good.
Do you want to put that on?
How do you clap?
Just put it on your head. Other way around. Here, I'll do it too. There you go. That should work. Something like that.
All right, can you hear me? Okay. So I thought, Marion Dolby was the one, and the other one was Mrs. Ken McKellar. I thought there's a whole lot of family of Peter's still living, and why don't they do it? But anyway, I went home. My wife said, "Don't you think you got enough stuff to do without starting anything else?" And what I done, I happened to meet a guy by the name of Carl LeBras. He bought and sold books. He could come from Inwood. He had a car. I don't know how he got to Glencoe with it, but he did. He came often. And he was a great help to me when I started putting my Peter McArthur books together and finding out a lot, because their farm, the Peter McArthur farm, was right across from our farm. And I'd heard a lot of stories about him. So the people who wanted information, I was glad to give them information. When they asked me about this Centuria thing that we're had today, I guess. I thought, I wonder what that's going to be. No, there was Stephanie McDonald. She came to my place. We spent about 3 hours just talking about Peter McArthur. Stephanie McDonald, she lives in Ireland. She was talking to me 2 days ago. She's a very talented person. And Mary Simpson told me I had to get on the bandwagon and do some more of this scouting. So there was many people. You can't start into an effort like this with one book of anybody or one thing and say you done us. Now we have moved a lot of books in the Sinclair family. Right now, when I go home today, this book here is going to go to John. John lives on the farm. He lives in the house, and Fred owns the land. And one of the things that Peter really liked was that bush. Now that was a demonstration woodlot. And he looked after it. He really looked after it good. They said that the highest part on the farm is where he made syrup. There's a little thing back in the woods, and he'd go back there. He believed in nature so much. Like when the birds came and the maple syrup, just like our fellows are this year, are going to really be lucky. The syrup is running. So then I met a lot of other people that said, we'll help you, we'll help you. Well, a lot of them did come forth. But this good friend of mine, Mr. LeBras, he stopped by often. He'd bring me some books. He would, the first time he came, he said, can we go back to where Peter wrote a lot? And I said, yep, we can. We just drive back through this pasture and there it is. And it's really extremely funny. There was a nice little bunch of pine trees back there. There was about 15 of them. And we got a great big windstorm one time. And it leveled every one of them trees but one. That one tree's still back there. I don't know whether anybody's going to cut it down or not. But a friend of mine that made toys, he come and took all the logs. But this old Carl was a very smart. I don't know if any of you guys ever met Carl or not, but I think he's passed on now. But we have one of my grandsons. He's going to move the cabinet, which Peter used to put books in, and it was a 4-high one. It was ugly, real ugly. And we had a few people said they could fix it. But when I was in the roofing business and eavesdropping, it was really handy. You could just chuck stuff in them little things. Well, it came back home to me. A lot of guys said they could fix it, but I didn't think they were much better carpenters than a farmer. But I one Sunday morning when my wife had to go to church and I didn't, I stayed home. I took that down to the garage and I made it from a 4 to a 3. And we put all new drawers in it. I got jumped one step ahead of myself. I didn't know who was going to do it, but my Madeline's nephews were both cabinet makers. So I took it over to Kerry Remley, and he made the new drawers, and we brought it right back like new. It's a real beautiful thing now because it's only 3 high instead of 4 high. It is at John's, right on the same site where the other house is. We bought another house and replaced it, and it so happened that that house was the very same size. It came from over in the area where they were bringing troubled kids from Toronto out into, well, it's just about where I'm spending my life right now over there in the senior citizen home. And It's not as good as you think, people. So, you know, kind of, but you can't walk away from it. But all of this stuff I have done, it never cost me no money. I've met a lot of people. Peter was not ambitious at all, but we all maybe should have took some of his stuff. We have the books, all the books that he wrote in Canada, but the one I got the biggest thrill about was how to teach one grandmother how to suck eggs. But he went to England on that one, and well, he took three little kids and his wife on this trip. Him and the boss didn't get along too good over there, so they commenced the fighting right away. And I didn't think I was ever going to get a copy of it, but Myra Johnson happened to get one. And her grandfather and Peter McArthur were good friends. So she called me up and said, I got one. So I slipped right over to her place to get How to Teach One's Grandmother to Suck Eggs. It started out with the date every morning, and then there was a long lull. My wife said supper's ready, and I went to the table and I rushed right back. It was real failure, that book. And that's all he would write. And he was a really intelligent man. He was way more intelligent than most of the farmers, but it didn't seem to matter. Now that we own this farm, we all are about as proud of that bush. It was a demonstration woodlot, and it still is. Except now you cannot go back there and cut trees without calling the government, because they tell you when and how and all that. I don't know how Peter would have took things like this, but that's about all I have to say, because I didn't want to take anybody else's time up. But it's been an interesting thing. Naturally, I guess most of you people know that we own the farm. He talked a lot about making money, but you know, he never made much money. I just don't understand how. But the farmers around him, see, they were uneducated, and a lot of them could hardly scratch their name, because that's what I heard. But he was overeducated. But we're going to keep the Peter McArthur farm as long as we can. I don't think I'm going to be farming anymore. But that's all I'm going to tell you today. His whole story, there's a lot of pictures in here about Peter. And I guess that's why today the farmers are expanding so much. But they do not take time for nature, as Peter said. So thank you very much. Better be careful.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Very interesting. Not sure whether this is supposed to be on there or on here. It was on there when I came in. Anyway, now I'm told that, where are we? Myra Simpson is prepared to read her favorite poem.
Thank you, Norm.
Thank you.
I'll sit here. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. First, I'd like to show you the copy that I have of To Be Taken with Salt, teaching your grandmother to suck eggs. This is inscribed in the first page to Martin, who was my grandfather, nephew to Peter McArthur. So, and it is signed by Peter McArthur. It said, hoping you'll find some fun in it, I think is what it says. So Peter wrote this, gave it to my grandfather. And we treasure this one a lot. The poem I'd like to read is for this time of year. Sugar weather. When snowballs pack on the horses' hoofs and the wind from the south blows warm, when the cattle stand where the sunbeams beat and the noon has a dreamy charm, when icicles crash from the dripping eaves and the furrows peep black through the snow, then I hurry away to the sugar bush, for the sap will run, I know. With auger and axe and spile and trough, to each tree a visit I pay, and every boy in the countryside is eager to help today. We roll the back logs into their place and the kettles between them swing, then gather the wood for the roaring fire and the sap in pails full bring. A fig for your arches and modern ways, a fig for your sheet iron pan. I like the smoky old kettles best, and I stick to the good old plan. We're going to make sugar and taffy tonight on the swing pole under the tree. And the girls and boys for miles around are all sworn friends to me. The hens are cackling again in the barn and the cattle beginning to bawl. And neighbors who long have been acting cool now make a forgiving call. For there's no love feast like a taffy pull with its hearty and sticky fun. And I know the whole world is at peace with me, for the sap has commenced to run. Peter McArthur.
Thank you for that, Myra. Getting near the end of it. Time to, does anybody have any more questions? That's easy. Yep. Some words?
I was just going to mention before we wrap up that with the 100th anniversary of Peter's death, there's never been any plaque or any signs or anything put at the old farmstead. Even in the cemetery out at Edie, there's no, other than his stone, there's nothing to commemorate Peter. So we hope this year will be the year that we ourselves in the Historic Society can do something about that. So we'd like some input too from our members too, what they'd like to see at both of those sites. I know at the farmstead, it'll be probably just a sign at the side of the road, that sort of thing. But we'd still like some input regarding design and how these things could happen this year. So we want to take it upon ourselves to do that this year. And that's all I have to say about that. I think before we end though, I think upcoming events, maybe Angie might want to. Yeah. Okay, I'll sit down.
Need this?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Be loud here. On May 29th at Tate's Corners Schoolhouse, or our Tate's Corners Community Center, we're going to be having a historical presentation at 7 p.m. Jean Hewitt is going to be doing an audiovisual presentation of the women's movement in our area. And then it turns into a dramatic presentation of the famous five. And it shows the Canadian suffragette movement in Edmonton of 1917. It's going to be a dynamic presentation by a very skilled company that shares this production all over Southwestern Ontario. And it is consistently presented at Fanshawe Pioneer Village. So it's going to be Wednesday, May 29th at Tate's Corners. Doors open at 6:30. And we only have room for 50 people and suggested donation of $10. And our community will be providing tea and goodies afterwards. And there will not be any Zoom. There will not be any kind of technical devices. So we encourage you all to come, and it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful evening. Thank you.
I'd like to follow up with that. Stephanie was remarking that it'd be great to have the next generation taking Peter McArthur's place, and we do have our own Mark Crawford, who left Glencoe to become an actor and graduated to being a celebrated playwright. The theaters just can't wait for him to produce his next feature, and this summer being premiered at Blythe Festival is Mark Crawford's new play, The Golden Anniversaries. So check that out. I asked Mark, we've been talking to him about the Peter McArthur Year of Commemoration, and he suggested that we wanted to talk to other current humorists, that we should reach out to the Stephen Leacock Associates, who are responsible for the annual Leacock Medal for Humor. And so this is where you find all the writers in Canada who are writing funny stuff, and they compete to be recognized by this annual award. But something of interest to our local kids, like how can we get the kids interested and get them inspired to write? We need to promote to the regional high schools that there's a student competition and a $1,500 first prize, and second and third prize is $750, and deadline's coming right up. So there's something that we can promote to our high schools in the area, as well as draw their attention to our Peter McArthur. And the board of directors from the Stephen Leacock Award send their greetings today to our gathering, and they were thrilled to hear us commemorating Peter McArthur's work. And Peter McArthur wrote a biography about Stephen Leacock. So there's all kinds of neat connections. And then don't forget to go to our website, come to our events, shows what's upcoming, and our next event is March 3rd, the memorial out at Battle of Longwoods, that's done every year in partnership with the Upper Thames Military Reenactment Society. That's it for me.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank our speakers, Stephanie and Donnie Sinclair, and our two readers of poems, Costa and Myra. That about wraps it up for us, but we would invite you not to run away. We have lots of goodies and refreshments to enjoy, and talk about Peter McArthur and pick up some of his materials. So
Could
I
I
guess
just
that's it.
say a few words?
Oh, you can't. Nope. That's it. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It's Janet Sterling. I'm a granddaughter of Peter McArthur, and I just wanted to say hello to a lot of my cousins that I see. I don't see Charlotte, but I see her daughter, Leslie Darling, and certainly Susan McKellar and Dan Burns and Catherine Burns and their daughter, Caitlin. And I'd just like to say thanks to Susan McKellar, who's there with her sister Myra, for helping me with my genealogy. And certainly Susan and I, if anyone wants to know any ancestors past Peter, we would certainly, through Harold Carruthers, share some of our information. And we go back to the original Peter, his father Archibald, his father another Archibald, and we're happy to share that information. Thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say?
I just want to thank all of the people that attended online. There were 35 windows open. Thank you so much for coming. And this is not the end. This is just the beginning of a year of events. So we'll be calling everyone back again.
Grab a coffee.
Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone. Off we go. Bye now.